What would you do if you spent 11 months believing your wife was feeding the homeless every Saturday, only to discover she had never once set foot inside a shelter? Imagine walking through those doors with a bag of sandwiches and a heart full of pride, only to hear a volunteer coordinator say, "We have no record of anyone by that name." Now imagine your 17-year-old daughter pulling up vacation photos from a hidden album on your wife's phone. Photos of a lakeside cabin 60 miles away, with a man you recognize from her office Christmas party. That is the story I am about to tell you, and every word of it is true, because it happened to me. My name is Renee Holloway, and for the better part of 2 decades, I considered myself one of the luckiest men in Springfield, Ohio. I was 43 years old, working as a warehouse supervisor at the Barrett Regional Distribution Center on Bechtel Avenue, pulling down about $52,000 a year with overtime factored in. The work was physical and unglamorous, managing a dock crew of 22, coordinating pallet loads and outbound shipments, making sure nothing fell behind during the holiday peak season that ran from October through January. But the paycheck was steady, the benefits were decent, and every 2 weeks when that direct deposit hit, I knew my family was taken care of. My wife Renee was 40 years old, an office administrator at Hayward Medical Devices, a mid-sized surgical instrument manufacturer on the east side of town, earning $46,000 a year. We had been married for 19 years. We met at a 4th of July cookout in 2005, hosted by a mutual friend at a house on Cedar Street. Renee was wearing a white sundress and laughing at something someone said, and I walked over and introduced myself like a man who did not know the meaning of the word shy. We dated for 2 years, married in a small ceremony at Snyder Park Pavilion in June of 2007, and started building what I genuinely believed was a solid, honest, unremarkable life. Our daughter Paige was 17, a junior at Springfield High School, captain of the debate team, a straight-A student who kept a color-coded planner and could argue circles around adults twice her age. Between Renee's salary and mine, we brought in about $98,000 a year. We were not rich. We were not poor. We were that middle band of American families who live carefully and hope nothing goes sideways. The thing about Renee that made me proudest, that I bragged about to coworkers, mentioned at family dinners, held up as evidence that I had married well, was her volunteer work. In May of 2025, she came home from work on a Tuesday evening and told me she had signed up to volunteer at the Interfaith Hospitality Network shelter on South Limestone Street. The commitment was every Saturday, 9 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, helping prepare and serve meals, sorting donated clothing, and occasionally assisting with intake paperwork. She said a coworker had told her about the program and that something inside her had felt called to give back. I remember the conversation because we were sitting on the back porch with the grill cooling down behind us, and there was a sincerity in her voice that made my chest tighten with admiration. I told her I was proud of her. She smiled and said it just felt like the right thing to do. Every Saturday after that conversation, Renee followed the same routine. She would wake up at 7:30, shower, pack a tote bag with comfortable shoes and a change of clothes, pull her hair back into a low ponytail, and drive away in her gray 2019 Honda Civic by 8:45. She would return home around 3 in the afternoon, sometimes smelling faintly of industrial cleaning solution, and tell me stories about the people she had met at the shelter. She talked about a veteran named Charlie who was trying to get back on his feet after a medical discharge, a single mother with twin girls who needed winter coats before the Ohio cold set in, an elderly man named Harold who played harmonica in the dining hall and made everyone smile. The details were so specific, so vivid, so consistent week after week, that I never questioned a single word. Why would I? My wife was telling me she spent her Saturdays helping people less fortunate than us, and that was exactly the kind of person I believed she was. For 11 months, this was our Saturday rhythm. I would sleep in until 8 or so, do yard work or fix something around the house, maybe drive Paige to the public library on South Fountain Avenue, or to debate practice at the school. Renee was at the shelter. On several occasions I offered to join her. I figured I could help carry boxes or set up tables, make myself useful. Every time, she had a reason it would not work. They had enough volunteers that particular Saturday. The coordinator preferred consistency over rotating faces. They were doing confidential intake interviews, and outsiders were not permitted. A training session had been scheduled, and only registered volunteers could attend. Each excuse, taken individually, sounded perfectly reasonable. It was only much later, when I laid them all side by side like tiles in a mosaic, that I saw the pattern for what it was. A wall, carefully constructed to keep me from ever stepping foot inside a building where my wife had never been. In March of 2026, I decided to surprise her. It was a crisp Saturday morning, the kind of early spring day in Ohio where the sky is impossibly blue and you can still see your breath. I woke up early, drove to Kroger on Upper Valley Pike, and bought sourdough bread, sliced turkey, Swiss cheese, stone ground mustard, 2 bottles of water, and a bag of barbecue chips. I made 6 turkey and Swiss sandwiches in the kitchen, enough for Renee and a few of the volunteers, packed them in a brown paper bag, and drove across town to the Interfaith Hospitality Network with a stupid grin on my face. I was going to walk in, find my wife, hand her the bag, and tell her how proud I was. Maybe I would finally meet Charlie the veteran or the lady with the twins. I was excited the way a man gets excited when he thinks he is about to make his wife stay. The shelter was in a converted church annex with a flat roof and a painted mural of interlocking hands on the exterior wall. I parked in the small lot out front, grabbed the bag of sandwiches, and walked through the main entrance. The lobby was modest: folding tables, a bulletin board covered in flyers, a desk near the door staffed by a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. I introduced myself. "I'm Renee Holloway," I said. "My wife Renee volunteers here on Saturdays. I wanted to surprise her with some lunch." The woman smiled politely, turned to her computer, and typed in the name. The smile faded. She checked a binder of volunteer rosters going back to January 2025. She flipped pages. She called over a younger coordinator, a man named Jesse, who had worked at the shelter for 3 years. Jesse checked the electronic sign-in system. Neither of them had any record of a Renee Holloway, not as a volunteer, not as a donor, not as a one-time visitor. I stood at that desk for what felt like an hour but was probably 4 minutes, holding a paper bag full of sandwiches that were slowly getting warm, while 2 strangers tried not to look at me with pity. Jesse offered to check the roster one more time. I told him not to bother. I thanked them both, walked back to my truck, and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, staring through the windshield at the mural on the wall. The interlocking hands. The irony was so heavy I could feel it pressing on my chest. My wife had not been holding anyone's hand at this shelter. She had never served a meal, sorted a coat, or filed an intake form. 11 months of Saturdays, accounted for by a lie so elaborate it had its own cast of fictional characters. Charlie the veteran did not exist. The single mother with the twins did not exist. Harold and his harmonica did not exist. None of it was real. The drive home was a blur. I could not tell you what route I took, or whether I stopped at any red lights. My body was operating the vehicle while my mind spun in a tight, airless loop, replaying every Saturday morning I had watched Renee pull out of the driveway with her tote bag and her ponytail and her easy wave from the driver's window. The sandwiches sat in the passenger seat, the brown paper bag slowly darkening with grease from the turkey, and I remember thinking that the sandwiches were the most pathetic detail of this entire situation. A grown man making lunch for a wife who was not where she said she would be. I had stood in the kitchen that morning, cutting sourdough with a bread knife, spreading mustard, wrapping each sandwich in wax paper, and the whole time Renee had already been driving north on Route 68 toward whatever truth I was about to discover. That brown paper bag was the physical monument to my ignorance, and it sat on my passenger seat like evidence. I did not call Renee. I did not send her a text. I pulled into the driveway on Kenton Street and sat there for 20 minutes with the engine running, staring at the closed garage door, trying to construct any scenario that did not lead where my gut was already pointing. Maybe she volunteered at a different shelter and had mixed up the name. Maybe she had transferred to another location and forgotten to tell me. I was building these alternatives the way a drowning man grabs at floating debris, knowing full well that none of it would hold my weight. The level of detail she had maintained, the names, the stories, the cleaning smell, the tired satisfaction on her face every Saturday, that was not a mix-up. That was a performance. A rehearsed, sustained, 11-month performance. By the time I shut off the engine and walked into the house, my hands were shaking. Paige was at the kitchen table, working on a history paper about the Reconstruction era. She looked up and asked if I was okay. She said the color had drained from my face. I told her I was fine, just a headache from the drive. That was the first lie I told in this entire ordeal, and it tasted like copper in my mouth. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at my own face. I was 43 years old. I had been married for 19 years, and I suddenly had no idea who my wife actually was. The man in the mirror looked tired and lost, and 10 years older than he had looked that morning when he was cutting turkey sandwiches with a stupid grin on his face. I splashed water on my face, dried it with a hand towel, and went back out to the kitchen to wait for Renee to come home from wherever she actually was. Renee came home at 3:15 that afternoon, right on schedule. She walked through the kitchen door looking exactly like she always did after a shift. Hair slightly loose from the ponytail, comfortable sneakers on, that particular expression of tired but fulfilled warmth that she had perfected over nearly a year of practice. She set her tote bag on the counter and told me they had served 62 people that day and that Charlie had finally been approved for transitional housing. She described a new family, a mother with a baby and a toddler, and how heartbreaking it was to see a child that young sleeping on a cot. I stood at the counter listening to my wife narrate scenes that had never taken place, describing human beings who probably did not exist, and I felt something crack inside me. Not loudly, not with drama. It was a hairline fracture spreading silently through glass. I smiled and told her that was wonderful news about Charlie. I made her a plate of leftover pasta. I watched her eat it. That night, after Renee fell asleep beside me at 11:30, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan and made a decision. I was not going to confront her. Not yet. Not without knowing exactly what I was dealing with. Emotion without information is just noise. I needed facts. I needed evidence. I needed to find out where my wife actually spent her Saturdays for the past 11 months, and I needed to do it without tipping her off. The next morning, Sunday, I drove to Dollar General on South Limestone Street, sat in the parking lot, and made a list in a pocket notebook. Step 1. Verify that Renee was not volunteering at any shelter in the Springfield area. Step 2. Find out where she actually went on Saturdays. Step 3. Consult a lawyer. Step 4. Confront. I was going to do this in order, methodically, because if my marriage was over, and sitting in that parking lot, I already knew it probably was, then I was not going to stumble into the wreckage blindly. I owed myself that much. I owed Paige that much. On Monday, I took a personal day from the distribution center and began checking shelters. I drove to the Springfield Soup Kitchen on East Main Street, the Salvation Army on West North Street, Catholic Social Services on South Fountain Avenue, and the McKinney-Vento Liaison Office at the Clark County Department of Job and Family Services. At each location, I gave Renee's full name and date of birth and asked if she had ever volunteered, donated, or participated in any program. The answer was the same everywhere: no. No sign-in records, no volunteer applications, no background checks on file, no training acknowledgments. My wife had not volunteered at a single homeless assistance organization in Clark County. Whatever she had been doing every Saturday since May of 2025, it had nothing whatsoever to do with charity. That afternoon, I made the phone call that would change the trajectory of everything. I called Cliff Benson. Cliff was 58 years old, a retired Ohio State Highway Patrol trooper who had put in 26 years before hanging up his badge and opening a private investigation practice out of a small second-floor office on North Fountain Avenue. A coworker at the warehouse named Doug had used Cliff during his own divorce 2 years earlier and told me Cliff was thorough, discreet, and fair on pricing. I met Cliff at a Panera Bread on Upper Valley Pike because I did not want to be seen walking into a PI's office in a town the size of Springfield, where everyone knows everyone's truck. Cliff was a big man with a gray crew cut and hands that looked like they had been used for serious purposes. He listened to my story without interruption, took notes in a small leather-bound pad, and then looked at me with an expression that was not unkind, but was entirely unsurprised. "The volunteer alibi is a good one," he said. "Most people won't check. The ones who do usually find what you found." He quoted me $1,500 for a 2-week surveillance package. I shook his hand and said yes before he finished the sentence. Cliff started the following Saturday. He knew Renee's routine because I had given him every detail. The 8:45 departure, the gray Honda Civic, the route she would likely take toward South Limestone. Cliff parked his dark blue Chevy Silverado with tinted windows on Selma Road, 2 blocks east of our house, and waited. At 8:43, Renee pulled out of the driveway. Cliff followed at a comfortable distance, the kind of distance a 26-year state trooper knows how to maintain without being detected. Renee did not turn south toward the shelter. She turned north. She took U.S. Route 68 through Urbana, then cut west on State Route 36. She drove for just over an hour. Her destination was a lakeside cabin on the north shore of Indian Lake, near the town of Russell's Point in Logan County, approximately 60 miles from Springfield. Cliff called me at 11:30. His voice was calm and professional, the voice of a man who has delivered this particular kind of news hundreds of times. The cabin was a 2-bedroom A-frame with cedar siding, a wooden dock extending into the lake, and a stone fire pit in the side yard. It was listed on VRBO as a vacation rental, and the reservation had been made under the name R. Caruso, Renee's maiden name. Cliff had parked across the lake at a public boat ramp with a clear sightline and a telephoto lens. He photographed Renee's gray Honda Civic in the gravel driveway. He photographed a second vehicle parked beside it, a black 2023 BMW X5, Ohio plate Charlie Tango 9er 427. Cliff ran the plate through a contact at the BMV. The X5 was registered to Garrett Webb, age 45, of New Carlisle, Ohio. Garrett Webb was the sales director at Hayward Medical Devices, my wife's coworker, a member of the same executive leadership team that Renee's department reported to. I asked Cliff if he was certain. He sent me the photos. There was no room for uncertainty. The second Saturday, Cliff followed them again. This time he got more. He positioned himself at a picnic area on the south shore of Indian Lake with a pair of high-powered binoculars and his telephoto camera, and he watched the cabin from 9:30 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. He photographed Renee and Garrett walking together from the cabin to the dock, Garrett's arm draped around her waist with the easy familiarity of a man who had done it many times. He photographed them carrying grocery bags from the BMW into the cabin, steaks visible through a clear bag, 2 bottles of red wine, a 6-pack of craft beer, the kind of provisions that speak not of a first date, but of a well-worn domestic routine. He photographed them sitting in Adirondack chairs by the fire pit in the early afternoon, Renee's feet tucked under her, Garrett reading a paperback. They looked, Cliff told me later, like a couple on a regular weekend. That was the phrase he used, and it cut deeper than anything else he could have said. Cliff pulled the VRBO rental records through a licensed contact in the hospitality records industry. The cabin had been booked every Saturday from May 17, 2025 through March 29, 2026. 46 consecutive weekends at a nightly rate of $185. Total rental cost, $8,510. The payments came from a PayPal account linked to an email address I had never seen before. renee.caruso.private@gmail.com. That email address, using her maiden name, told me that Renee had set up this infrastructure deliberately, months before the first booking, creating a financial identity specifically designed to hide the spending from our shared accounts. She had planned this. Every detail had been thought through. The maiden name, the separate PayPal, the VRBO rather than a hotel that might generate a credit card statement. This was not a woman who had stumbled into something. This was a woman who had engineered something. Cliff also ran a comprehensive background check on Garrett Webb. He was 45, born in Kettering, divorced twice, once in 2014 and again in 2019, with no children from either marriage. His base salary at Hayward Medical Devices was $112,000 annually, with commission that typically pushed his total compensation north of $140,000. He had a DUI conviction from 2019 in Clark County and a dismissed domestic assault charge from 2017 in Montgomery County. He owned a 3-bedroom house in New Carlisle valued at $260,000 and drove a vehicle that cost more than my annual salary. This was the man my wife had chosen. This was who she spent her Saturdays with while I mowed the lawn and helped our daughter study for the SAT. The revelation arrived in waves over the following days, and each wave was a different kind of pain. The first was raw disbelief, a stubborn, almost childlike refusal to accept that the woman I had shared a bed with for 19 years could sustain this level of calculated deception. The second wave was anger, the kind that makes your jaw ache from clenching and turns ordinary objects, her coffee mug on the counter, her jacket on the hook by the door, into provocations. The third wave came on a Tuesday evening while I was eating a microwaved bowl of leftover chili alone at the kitchen table because Renee was working late, or said she was. It was grief. Deep, hollow, sickening grief. The kind that makes you realize you are mourning a person who is still alive, because the person you believed in, the woman who volunteered at the shelter and cared about Charlie the veteran, had never existed. I was mourning a fiction, and the author of that fiction was sleeping in the next room. I did not tell Paige. Not yet. I was protecting her, or maybe I was protecting myself from the moment when I would have to say the words aloud and make them real. But Paige was 17 years old, a debate team captain who had been trained to read body language, detect inconsistencies, and challenge narratives. She had been watching me more closely than I realized. She noticed I was not sleeping well. She told me later she could hear me pacing in the hallway at 2 in the morning. She noticed I had stopped asking Renee about the shelter. She noticed the way I flinched, almost imperceptibly, when Renee mentioned Saturday plans. She noticed the tension in the house that I thought I was successfully concealing. And then, on a Wednesday evening in the third week of my investigation, Paige came to me with something that shattered any remaining hope that this could be explained away. She was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, holding her phone with both hands, the screen facing me. Her face was pale, and her eyes were rimmed with red, the way they get when you have been crying for a while before deciding to face someone. "Dad," she said, her voice quiet but steady, the debate team composure holding even now. "I need to show you something, and I need you to sit down first." She walked over and sat beside me on the edge of the bed. She explained that Renee had set up family sharing on their iCloud accounts 2 years ago so they could share storage space and app purchases. What Renee had apparently never realized, or had forgotten in the carelessness that comes with sustained deception, was that hidden photo albums in iCloud are not fully hidden from family members who share the same account with the right privacy settings toggled. Paige had stumbled across a folder while looking for a recipe photo Renee had saved weeks earlier. The folder was labeled Weekend Plans. Inside were 43 photographs spanning from June 2025 through March 2026, arranged chronologically. Photos of a lakeside cabin with a wooden dock extending over dark water. Photos of wine glasses balanced on the stone ledge of a fire pit at sunset, the lake golden in the background. Photos of Renee in a plush white bathrobe standing on a porch, her hair down, smiling at the camera with an expression I had not seen her wear in years, unguarded, playful, young. And photos of Renee with a man. A tall, gray-haired man in expensive aviator sunglasses, his arm around her shoulders, kissing her on the cheek at what appeared to be a lakeside restaurant, sitting across from her at a candlelit dinner table, standing on the dock with the sunset behind them in a pose that looked like an engagement photo. Paige recognized him. She had seen him 6 months earlier at the Hayward Medical Devices Christmas party at the Courtyard Marriott in downtown Springfield. His name tag had read Garrett Webb, Sales Director. My daughter sat on that bed and cried quietly while I scrolled through 43 photographs that documented the parallel life my wife had been living. Each image was a blade, but I forced myself to look at every single one because I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. The photos spanned seasons: summer shots with the lake glittering under July sun, fall shots with the trees blazing orange along the shoreline, winter shots with frost on the dock railing and steam rising from coffee mugs held by two people who looked, in every frame, like they belonged together. This was not an impulsive fling that had spiraled out of control. This was architecture. This was a second life, designed and maintained with the same careful planning that Renee brought to everything she did. A routine, a location, a cover story, a hidden email account, a hidden photo album. Paige asked me through her tears if I already knew. I told her the truth, that I had found out 3 weeks ago at the shelter. She laughed once, a short, brittle sound, and said, "The sandwiches, oh God, the sandwiches." Then she said something that cracked my heart wide open, in a way that nothing else in this entire ordeal had managed. She looked at me with wet eyes and said, "I kept hoping she was actually helping people, Dad. I kept hoping there would be an explanation." I pulled my daughter close and held her while she cried into my shoulder, and I promised her that whatever happened next, whatever this became, she and I were going to be okay. I meant it with every cell in my body. I meant it the way you mean something when you know your child's world has just been rearranged without her consent, and the only solid ground she has left is you. We sat on that bed for a long time, the phone with its 43 photographs face down on the mattress between us, and we did not say much else. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that happen in silence. The next morning, I called Cliff Benson and told him about the iCloud photos. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I checked the phone to make sure the call had not dropped. Then he said they were valuable corroboration, but that I needed to be strategic about how and when I introduced them. Evidence obtained through shared family accounts was generally admissible in Ohio courts, but the framing mattered. A judge needed to see the photos as a natural discovery, not the result of deliberate surveillance or hacking. He strongly recommended I consult a family law attorney before making any move toward confrontation. "You have more than enough to blow this open right now," Cliff said. "But if you do it wrong, you give her attorney ammunition to redirect the narrative." I trusted his judgment completely. The man had spent 26 years on the highway patrol and another 5 as a PI. He had seen more marriages end than most people would in 10 lifetimes. That same afternoon, I drove to the office of Yvonne Park on East Columbia Street, 2 blocks from the Clark County Courthouse. Yvonne was a family law attorney with 15 years of experience in Clark County and a reputation for being meticulous with financial discovery. Her office was small, a converted Victorian house with creaky floors and a waiting room that smelled like old coffee. But the diplomas on the wall and the stacked case binders on the shelves told me she knew exactly what she was doing. I sat in the chair across from her desk and laid everything out in sequence. The shelter visit, the Panera meeting with Cliff, the surveillance photos, the VRBO records, the PayPal account, the iCloud photos Paige had found, the 11 months of deception. Yvonne listened without interrupting, took notes on a yellow legal pad, and then explained the legal terrain. Ohio is a no-fault divorce state under Section 3105.01 of the Ohio Revised Code, which means I did not need to prove adultery to obtain a divorce. However, Yvonne explained that evidence of an extramarital affair could significantly influence two critical aspects of the proceedings: spousal support and the division of marital property. More specifically, the $8,510 Renee had spent on VRBO cabin rentals constituted what Ohio law calls dissipation of marital assets, the use of marital funds for purposes adverse to the marital relationship. Under Ohio Revised Code Section 3105.171, the court could order that dissipated funds be credited back to my share of the asset division, effectively making Renee repay the money she had funneled into the affair. Yvonne told me to preserve every piece of evidence, take screenshots of the iCloud photos before Renee could delete them, and under no circumstances confront my wife until she gave me the legal green light. The retainer was $3,000. I paid it that afternoon from a savings account at Huntington Bank that Renee did not regularly monitor. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life of my own. Not one built on deception, but on controlled silence. I went to work at the distribution center, came home, ate dinner with Renee and Paige, watched television in the living room, went to bed at 11. On Saturdays, Renee left for her volunteer shift, and I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee, staring at the wall, knowing that she was 60 miles north at a cabin on Indian Lake with a man named Garrett Webb. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to follow her, not to drive up there and kick in the door, not to call Garrett Webb's cell phone and tell him exactly what I thought of a man who spends weekends in a rented cabin with another man's wife. But Yvonne had been clear: do not act on emotion. Every impulsive move you make is a weapon the other side will use against you in court. So I waited. I ate dinner across from a woman I no longer recognized. I said goodnight to a stranger every evening, and I counted the days. Cliff continued his surveillance during those 2 weeks and added 2 more Saturdays of photographic documentation to the growing file. The folder was getting thick. He also worked with Yvonne to obtain Renee's cell phone records through a legal subpoena issued by the Clark County Court of Common Pleas. When those records came back, they were devastating. Between May of 2025 and March of 2026, Renee and Garrett had exchanged 4,117 text messages and 642 phone calls. Many of the calls occurred during Renee's lunch breaks at Hayward Medical Devices. 12 to 15-minute calls placed from the company parking lot, based on cell tower triangulation data. Others were late at night, between 11:15 and midnight, placed from our house on Kenton Street while I slept 10 feet away in our bed, oblivious. Cliff compiled a comprehensive financial summary of the affair's total cost. The numbers were methodical and merciless: $8,510 in VRBO cabin rentals, $960 in restaurant charges at establishments near Indian Lake, a place called Cranberry Resort, and a steakhouse in Russell's Point, $420 in gasoline for the 60-mile round trip every Saturday, $190 for a pair of Merrell hiking boots purchased at Cabela's in Bellefontaine, and $2,700 in gifts for Garrett that I would learn the specific details of later during discovery. Total estimated expenditure, $12,780 over 11 months. All of it funded through our joint checking account and Renee's hidden PayPal. That was money that could have gone toward Paige's college fund, or the roof repair I had been putting off, or the vacation to Myrtle Beach that Paige had been asking about for 2 years. Instead, it had gone to wine, steaks, cabin rentals, and personalized golf clubs for a man named Garrett Webb. Yvonne called me on a Friday afternoon in early April and said we were ready. She had prepared the divorce petition under Clark County case number 2026-DR-00417, a temporary restraining order freezing all marital accounts to prevent Renee from moving money, a request for exclusive use of the marital home based on Paige's need for residential stability during her junior year, and an emergency motion for forensic accounting of all financial accounts held individually or jointly by either party. I sat in her office, read every document twice, signed each one, and felt simultaneously terrified and relieved. Terrified because signing those papers meant my marriage was over. Relieved because the pretending was finally about to end. Yvonne looked at me across her desk and asked if I was certain. I told her I had been certain since the moment the woman at the shelter said she had never heard of my wife. There is no going back from a lie that big. You cannot unknow it. Yvonne filed the petition that afternoon. I decided to confront Renee on Sunday evening, one day before she would be officially served by the Clark County Sheriff's process server, because I wanted her to hear it from me first. I wanted to look into her eyes and see what happened when the mask finally came off. I arranged for Paige to spend the evening at her friend Jocelyn's house. I did not want my daughter to witness what was about to happen. Paige knew what was coming. She hugged me before she left, held on for a beat too long, and said, "You've got this, Dad." At 7:30 that evening, Renee was in the kitchen unloading the dishwasher, her back to me, humming something under her breath. I walked in carrying Cliff Benson's manila folder, 2 inches thick with photographs, records, and financial documents, and set it on the counter between us. She turned around, looked at the folder, then looked at me, and I watched her face cycle through a sequence of emotions so rapid it was almost cinematic. Confusion, flicker of recognition, dawning fear, and then a kind of still resignation, like a chess player who has just seen the checkmate 3 moves ahead. I opened the folder. I laid the surveillance photographs on the counter, one by one. The cabin, the dock, the BMW in the driveway, Renee and Garrett walking arm in arm, the grocery bags with wine bottles visible, the Adirondack chairs by the fire pit. I laid down the VRBO rental receipts, 46 consecutive Saturdays, $185 each, totaling $8,510, paid through a PayPal account linked to renee.caruso.private@gmail.com. I laid down the cell phone records, 4,117 texts, 642 calls, timestamps highlighted in yellow showing the late-night calls made from our bedroom. And finally, I laid down the iCloud photographs that Paige had found, the wine glasses at sunset, the white bathrobe, the kissing on the cheek shot, the candlelit dinner. I spread them across the counter like a losing hand of cards. 11 months, I said. Every Saturday. 46 weekends at Indian Lake with Garrett Webb. Over $12,000. You told me you were feeding the homeless. She did not deny it. When the evidence is literally spread across your kitchen counter in high-resolution photographs with date stamps and financial receipts, denial is not an option. What she did instead was cry. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her face in her hands and sobbed. Between sobs, she offered an explanation that I had already anticipated, because it is the same explanation that every unfaithful spouse reaches for like a life preserver. She felt invisible in our marriage. I worked too many hours. I came home exhausted. We had become roommates. She had lost herself. Garrett noticed her. Garrett listened to her. Garrett made her feel seen. Every sentence was a cliché so well worn it could have been pulled from a pamphlet titled, "Things Cheating Spouses Say." I stood at the counter and listened to all of it. And what struck me was not the words themselves, but the fluency with which she delivered them. The same fluency she had used to tell me about Charlie the veteran and the single mother with twins. Renee was always a convincing narrator. The only difference now was that I had stopped being a willing audience. I told her the divorce papers had already been filed and that she would be served by the sheriff's office the following morning. The crying stopped. She stared at me across the kitchen table with her mascara streaked and her mouth slightly open. "You already filed?" she asked, and the disbelief in her voice told me everything I needed to know about how she had expected this to end. She had expected tears, a fight, maybe some couples counseling, and then gradual reabsorption, the way an ocean absorbs a wave, the way she assumed I would absorb the blow and keep the structure intact. That is what Nathan does, after all. Nathan works, Nathan provides. Nathan holds the line. Except this time, Nathan had hired a private investigator, retained a lawyer, filed a petition, and assembled a folder of evidence 2 inches thick. This time, Nathan had a plan. She asked if we could talk about it, try to work through it, see a therapist together. I told her we were past that. She asked me not to tell Paige. I told her Paige already knew. And I watched something in Renee's face collapse when she realized the full extent of what she had lost. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life, but they were also the most clarifying. Renee moved into the guest bedroom the night of the confrontation and stayed there until she found an apartment 2 weeks later. The house on Kenton Street became a strange, silent place. 2 people passing each other in the hallway without speaking. Paige moving between us like a diplomat navigating hostile territory. Renee hired an attorney named Douglas Fisher from a Dayton firm, and the divorce proceedings began in earnest at the Clark County Court of Common Pleas before Judge Harold Kingsley, a veteran family court magistrate with a reputation for meticulous attention to financial evidence. Ohio law requires a minimum waiting period of 30 days between filing and finalization, but contested cases with property disputes and custody considerations typically take 4 to 8 months. Ours would land at 5 months. Yvonne Park was relentless on my behalf. She presented the forensic accounting to the court in a June hearing that lasted 3 hours and left Renee's attorney visibly rattled. The numbers painted a damning picture. In addition to the $8,510 in cabin rentals, Renee had spent $960 on restaurant meals near Indian Lake, $420 on gas, $190 on hiking boots, and $2,700 on gifts for Garrett, a leather briefcase from a shop in the Short North District of Columbus, a weekend spa package at a resort in Hocking Hills, and a set of personalized Callaway golf clubs purchased from a pro shop in Bellefontaine. Total dissipation of marital assets, $12,780. Every receipt, every PayPal transaction, every credit card charge was documented and entered into evidence. The paper trail Renee had tried to bury was now spread across a courtroom table. Judge Kingsley did not take kindly to the numbers. Douglas Fisher rose and argued that the cabin rentals were Renee's personal recreational expenses, and that adults in a marriage are entitled to discretionary spending without requiring spousal approval for every purchase. It was the best argument he could make with the hand he had been dealt, and it was not a bad argument in the abstract. But Yvonne demolished it by presenting the VRBO receipts alongside the cell phone records and surveillance photographs, demonstrating that every one of those expenses was undertaken exclusively in furtherance of an extramarital relationship, concealed through systematic deception, and funded with marital income without my knowledge or consent. Judge Kingsley agreed. In his written ruling, he cited Ohio Revised Code Section 3105.171 and found that Renee had engaged in willful dissipation of marital assets. He ordered a 60-40 split of all marital property in my favor. The house on Kenton Street, purchased for $168,000 in 2011 and appraised at $214,000 at the time of filing, was awarded to me. Renee was ordered to quitclaim her interest and remove her name from the mortgage within 90 days. The equity was $125,000 against a remaining mortgage balance of $89,000. Under the 60-40 split, I received $75,000 in equity credit, and Renee received $50,000. Since I was retaining the house, her $50,000 was satisfied through a combination of her portion of our retirement accounts and a cash offset I generated by refinancing in my name alone at 6.2% through Huntington Bank. Our joint savings of $18,000 was split 60-40. $10,800 to me, $7,200 to Renee. The vehicles were straightforward. I kept my 2017 Ford F-150 valued at $19,000. She kept her 2019 Honda Civic valued at $16,000. Joint credit card debt of $4,200 was allocated proportionally. Yvonne also secured a lump sum credit of $6,390, exactly half of the dissipated $12,780 deducted from Renee's share of the property division before distribution. In practical terms, Renee owed me money before she saw a dime of her own share. The math was unforgiving, but it was fair, and Judge Kingsley made it clear in his ruling that the dissipation finding was the direct consequence of Renee's choices, not judicial punishment. Spousal support was the most contested issue, and it was where Douglas Fisher put up the strongest fight. He argued that Renee's $46,000 salary was $6,000 less than mine, and that 19 years of marriage created a reasonable expectation of financial support during a transitional period. He cited case law, he cited precedent. He made the argument that Renee had sacrificed career advancement to support the family. Yvonne countered on two fronts. First, the salary gap between us was modest, and Renee had maintained continuous gainful employment throughout the entire marriage, with no barriers to self-sufficiency. Second, the dissipation evidence demonstrated that Renee had managed to spend $12,780 on an extramarital affair over 11 months, which substantially undermined any claim of financial hardship or dependence. Judge Kingsley issued a measured compromise: temporary spousal support of $400 per month for 12 months, but offset by the dissipation credit of $6,390. After the offset was applied, Renee's net receipt was effectively reduced to zero for the first 16 months of the support order. In practical terms, she would not see a support check until well into 2028, and by then, the 12-month support window would have long expired. Her attorney filed an appeal of the dissipation finding with the 2nd District Court of Appeals in Dayton, arguing that Judge Kingsley had applied the dissipation standard too broadly. The appeal was denied in October 2026 without oral argument, the 3-judge appellate panel finding that the trial court's ruling was supported by substantial, competent, and credible evidence. Douglas Fisher had taken his best shot at every stage, and the court system had held firm at every level. Custody of Paige was the one area where the proceedings moved quickly and without serious dispute. At 17, Paige was old enough under Ohio Revised Code Section 3109.04 to express a custodial preference, and the guardian ad litem, a family law attorney named Barbara Schultz, reported that Paige had been clear, calm, and articulate in stating her wish to live primarily with me. The debate team captain showed through even in the worst chapter of her life. Renee did not fight it. We agreed to a custody arrangement that gave me residential custody, with Renee receiving alternating weekends and Wednesday evening dinners. Paige was civil during these visits. She was raised better than to be cruel, but there was a distance between mother and daughter that had not existed before, a careful formality that replaced the easy warmth they had once shared. I watched my daughter navigate this new landscape with a maturity that simultaneously made me proud and grieved me, because no 17-year-old should have to be this composed about her mother's betrayal. She did not owe anyone poise. She had simply chosen it because she did not know what else to do. As for Garrett Webb, the consequences found him too, and they arrived with corporate efficiency. During the discovery phase, Yvonne subpoenaed employment records from Hayward Medical Devices, which triggered an internal HR investigation at the company. Hayward maintained an explicit policy, page 14 of the employee handbook, which every employee signed upon hiring, prohibiting undisclosed romantic relationships between employees in different organizational hierarchies. Renee, as an office administrator in the operations department, fell within an organizational structure that received budgetary allocations influenced by the sales division, which Garrett directed. The relationship constituted a clear policy violation, regardless of whether Garrett had direct supervisory authority over Renee. The HR department conducted interviews with both parties and reached its conclusion within 3 weeks. Garrett Webb was terminated in June of 2026 for violation of the Employee Code of Conduct. He was escorted out of the building on a Tuesday afternoon, according to what Paige later heard from a friend whose mother worked in Hayward's accounting department. Renee was not fired. Her role was classified as subordinate, and she was deemed the less culpable party under the company's graduated discipline framework. But she received a formal written warning placed in her permanent personnel file, a mark that would follow her to any future employer who conducted a thorough reference check. I did not celebrate Garrett's termination. I did not call him, confront him, or send him a message. But I would be dishonest if I said I felt sympathy for a 45-year-old twice-divorced man who spent 11 months in a rented lakeside cabin with another man's wife, while that man believed she was serving meals to the homeless. The divorce was finalized on September 14, 2026, 5 months and 9 days after I had walked into the Interfaith Hospitality Network shelter with a bag of turkey sandwiches and a heart full of misplaced pride. I sat in courtroom 3 of the Clark County Courthouse, a building I had driven past 1,000 times without ever imagining I would be sitting inside it for this purpose. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood paneling, fluorescent overhead lights, an American flag standing in the corner beside the judge's bench. Renee sat across the aisle with Douglas Fisher. She was wearing a navy blue blouse, and her hair was shorter than the last time I had seen her up close. She looked thinner, paler, as if the exposure and its aftermath had physically diminished her. We did not make eye contact. There was nothing left to say. When Judge Kingsley signed the final decree, I felt nothing dramatic. No fireworks of liberation, no collapse of renewed grief. Just a quiet click, like a lock turning in a deadbolt, and the knowledge that a door had closed permanently behind me. I stood up, shook Yvonne's hand, walked out of the courthouse into the September sunlight, and sat in my truck for 5 minutes before starting the engine. The total cost of ending my marriage, Yvonne's legal fees of $7,800, Cliff Benson's investigation at $2,100, the Huntington Bank refinance closing costs of $3,200, and miscellaneous court filing fees of $650, came to $13,750. It was worth every cent. You cannot put a price on truth, but if you could, $13,750 for the demolition of an 11-month lie would be a bargain at twice the cost. Paige was not in the courtroom that day. She had asked not to come, and I respected the request without question. That evening, she and I sat on the back porch, the same porch where Renee had first told me about her volunteer plans 16 months and a lifetime ago, and ate pepperoni pizza from Casano's and watched the September sun sink below the rooftops on Kenton Street. The air had that first autumn edge, cool enough to notice, warm enough to stay outside. We did not talk about the divorce, or the cabin, or Garrett, or any of it. We talked about her college applications, about whether Ohio State's pre-law program was better than Miami of Ohio's, about a documentary she had watched on Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. At one point she stopped mid-sentence, looked at me with those sharp brown eyes, and said, "We're going to be okay, right, Dad?" I told her we were. And for the first time in 6 months, sitting on that porch with pizza grease on my fingers and my daughter beside me, I actually believed it. The healing did not happen in a straight line. It happened in spirals. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. A good week followed by a Tuesday where I could not get out of bed for 15 minutes after the alarm went off. Some mornings I woke up and the house felt like mine again, and other mornings I walked past the guest bedroom where Renee had slept during those final 2 weeks and felt a wave of something I could not name. Not sadness, not anger, but a kind of hollowness, like a room that still has the indentation of furniture that has been removed. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Simone Hart, whose practice was in a converted Victorian on West Main Street near Wittenberg University. Dr. Hart was in her mid-50s, with a quiet voice and an unhurried manner that made her office feel like the one room in the world where time moved at a human pace. I saw her every Thursday evening for 4 months. We talked about trust, about anger, about a concept she called ambiguous loss, the grief you experience when someone is still alive, but the version of them you loved has ceased to exist. She helped me understand that my anger was justified and necessary, a natural response to betrayal, but that carrying it indefinitely would only calcify into bitterness, which is anger that has stopped being useful and started being corrosive. She helped me separate what Renee did from who I am, which is harder than it sounds, because when someone lies to you every single day for 11 months, a part of you inevitably asks what you missed, what you did wrong, what signals you should have caught sooner. Dr. Hart's answer was consistent and firm every time I raised it. Renee's deception was Renee's failure, not mine. The lie was hers, the choice was hers, and the consequences were hers. Paige started seeing her own counselor, a school psychologist at Springfield High named Dr. Wren, who specialized in adolescents dealing with family disruption. I did not ask Paige for details about their sessions. That was her space, her process, and she deserved to own it completely without her father hovering over every step of her recovery. But I could see the effect over the weeks and months that followed. She became less guarded. She started laughing more freely, the kind of full, unguarded laughter that I had not heard from her since before the shelter visit. She invited friends to the house again instead of always going to theirs. She threw herself into her senior year with a ferocity that impressed even her teachers, turning in papers early, volunteering for extra projects, filling every hour with purpose. Her grades never slipped. Her focus never wavered. She was building something solid beneath her feet, and she was not going to let her mother's choices tear it down. In November 2026, Paige won the regional debate championship at a tournament held at Centerville High School south of Dayton, arguing a case about digital privacy and Fourth Amendment protections in the age of algorithmic surveillance. I sat in the audience in the back row and cried. Not the restrained, jaw-clenched tears of the divorce proceedings, but real, uncomplicated tears of pride and relief, the kind that come from watching your child not just survive a catastrophe, but climb out of it stronger than she went in. She applied to Ohio State University for their pre-law track, and when the thick acceptance envelope arrived in January 2027, we drove to Young's Jersey Dairy in Yellow Springs and celebrated with chocolate milkshakes and onion rings and the kind of easy happiness that I had almost forgotten existed. I also began reconnecting with parts of my own life that had quietly atrophied during the long years of marriage. I joined a Thursday night bowling league at Northridge Lanes, something I had given up a decade earlier because Renee had designated Thursday as family night, which I now recognized as another mechanism of control wrapped in the comfortable language of togetherness. I rebuilt a friendship with a college buddy named Trent who lived in Dayton and who I had drifted away from over the years because Renee always found reasons to cancel plans or avoid socializing with him and his wife. I started going to the gym 3 mornings a week before my shift at the warehouse, something I had not done regularly since my 20s. It was not about looking good for anyone. It was about reclaiming my own time, my own body, my own daily routine, on my own terms. I also started visiting my mother more often. She lived in a senior apartment complex in Enon, 20 minutes east of Springfield, and at 71 years old, she was sharp as a tack and twice as pointed. My mother had never liked Renee, but had kept her opinions sealed for 19 years out of respect for my choices. Now, with the marriage dissolved and the truth laid bare, she finally said what she had been holding back. We were sitting in her small kitchen with coffee and oatmeal cookies, and she looked at me over the rim of her mug and said, "I always thought she was performing, Nathan." Like she was playing a part in a show only she knew the script to. The word performing landed like a bell strike, clear and resonant. That was exactly what Renee had been doing her entire adult life. Performing the role of devoted wife. Performing the role of compassionate volunteer. Performing the role of a person she had never been. Renee moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on East High Street after the divorce, a second-floor unit above a dry cleaner that cost her $750 a month. From what Paige shared with me during our dinners together, the relationship with Garrett Webb had not survived the transition from secret to public. Apparently, An affair conducted in a lakeside cabin under a borrowed name loses its romance when it is replaced by unemployment hearings, legal bills, and the knowledge that your lover's teenage daughter discovered your hidden photo album. The cabin at Indian Lake went back on the VRBO market, available for the next couple looking for a weekend escape. The fantasy dissolved. What remained were consequences and the slow, unglamorous work of living with what you have done. Renee attempted, over the following months, to rebuild her relationship with Paige. To her credit, she showed up for every scheduled visit without fail, never missed a Wednesday dinner, and did not make excuses or ask Paige to take sides. Eventually, she wrote Paige a 4-page handwritten letter that Paige allowed me to read. The letter was an acknowledgement, not an excuse, not a justification, but an honest reckoning with what she had done, who she had hurt, and the trust she had destroyed. It was the most honest document Renee had produced in years. Paige told me she was not ready to forgive her mother, but that she was not closing the door permanently. I told her that was fair, and I meant it. Forgiveness is not a debt you owe. It is a choice you make when and if the time is right, on your own terms, and no one gets to set that timetable for you. As for me, I did not forgive Renee. I do not pretend that I did, and I am not sure I ever will. But I stopped hating her, which is a different thing entirely, and in some ways, more difficult. Hatred gives you energy. It organizes your thoughts, focuses your anger, provides a clear target for every bad feeling you cannot name. Letting go of hatred leaves you in a quieter, emptier space that you have to learn to fill with something better. Work, family, friendships, the small daily pleasures of a life rebuilt from honest materials. Bowling on Thursday nights, coffee with my mother on Sunday mornings. Watching Paige rehearse her debate arguments in the living room, pacing back and forth with index cards, her voice rising and falling with the kind of confidence that makes the future feel like something worth showing up for. Nearly a year after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the kitchen on Kenton Street on a Saturday morning, making coffee, and realized with a start that it was the first Saturday in a very long time where I had not once thought about the shelter, or the cabin, or Garrett Webb. The thought had simply not crossed my mind until I noticed its absence, the way you notice silence only after the noise has stopped. Paige was upstairs getting ready for a practice round. The house was clean. The mortgage was current. The October sun was coming through the window above the sink in that particular golden way it does in Ohio when autumn is just beginning to turn the air cool. I poured my coffee, stood at the counter, and existed in my own life without the weight of someone else's lie pressing down on me. It was not happiness exactly. It was something quieter, more durable, more earned. It was peace. Justice had been served. The deception had been uncovered, the courts had weighed the evidence, and the financial scales had been balanced, as well as any institution can balance them. The guilty had faced consequences, not dramatic, cinematic consequences, but the real and grinding kind that come from losing your home, your reputation, your partner's retirement savings, and the easy trust of your only child. The innocent had been bruised, but not broken. And Nathan Holloway and his daughter Paige had made it through, together. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. We will see you in the next one.